Hello, and welcome to my 6200 presentation. My name is Joshua Jenkins, and welcome. Our task for today is we're going to talk a little bit about the paper in which we were supposed to write a summary about for MITMA attacks used by IPC. Our topic list for the day is we're going to cover an overview of what IPC is. We're going to talk about how the attack works. We're going to talk about the attack scope, why it's important, and then we're going to follow up by answering a few questions provided by the professor. Our overview. Inter-Process Communication Mechanism, IPC, is a system that is internal to a computer's operating system. It is used by many services, such as software applications, which use it to exchange information between front-end applications and back-end databases. The inter-process communication mechanism allows processes to communicate to each other and synchronize their actions. Examples of IPC are client-server communication, network sockets, named pipes, and USB devices. How do these attacks work? How are people manipulating IPCs? The attack type is similar to an impersonation or man-in-the-middle attack, but unlike those, the attack location is within the computer itself. In these attacks, the attacker is someone that can physically access the login environment and manipulate processes that are being run to obtain sensitive private information from another user. The attacker is able to achieve this by intercepting communication between victim user processes using IPC. Generally, the attack is running in the background and it's attached to a different login session than the victim's processes. But since the computers share the same IPC related processes with multiple existing user accounts, it can be manipulated to obtain sensitive private information of another account. What this is saying is if an individual has login access to a computer, they can run an attack over the IPC channel, which is shared by all the users that are on that computer. And with that, they're able to collect sensitive information on the users that the attack is being run on. Now that we know how the attack works, let's talk about the attack scope. In this paper, it mentions how there were vulnerabilities in security critical applications that used IPC. It explains how the oversight could cause exploitations to occur. The oversight is the developer's forgetfulness to actually develop the program for insider attacks as well. Instead, most of the developers were mainly focused on external attacks instead of the less common internal user attack. So, what type of devices were affected? What type of vulnerabilities and security critical applications were affected? Security applications such as password managers, two-factor authentications, and applications that have been split into separate front-end and back-end processes, such as back-end API for developing a website, were all compromised. 1Password was one of those examples of a password manager that was affected. It had been using the IPC channels without encrypting its information properly. Because of that, an attacker could possibly get access to very critical password related information. So, why is it important? The discovery of these vulnerabilities are important in helping create more secure applications. It is important for developers to be able to know how to write secure code for not only the outsider threats, but also the insider threats. It is important to know the newly discovered attack types and how to better protect against them. But the main importance of this paper is to bring light on how these attacks can have an effect on everyone's personal security. This image right here is an example of an insider attack inside your organization. They may look like anybody else, but on the inside, they're a completely different person and are capable of damaging the reputation of the business and the brand. Now, let us finish the discussion with the professor's posed questions. Question number 1. What problem does the paper try to solve? Sorry about that glitch. In this paper, the overarching problem that is being addressed and potentially mitigated is how IPCs are being used in different types of attacks where non-privileged processes are impersonating them. The authors are trying to bring light onto this problem that are internal within Mac, Linux, and Windows-based operating systems. The author's main goal is to explain how these attacks can happen and also disclose their findings to the respective vendors. So seeing that, based on what we just read and what I just spoke about, the main goal of this article was just to talk about it hypothetically of how this attack could possibly occur and what overarching problems could manifest from this. The next question: why is this problem important? The problem of an internal-based attack is that the user being targeted does not realize that they are being targeted until it's too late. Since most users trust that there is not a malicious actor using their personal device, the thought of an attack happening does not normally cross their minds. That is why addressing this is a major security concern. This type of attack can happen to anybody or anyone. That is why it is important to work fast to try to prevent these types of attacks from affecting any more lives. Although the likelihood of an attack of this complexity occurring is quite rare, it is still important to address it nonetheless. What I'm saying there is, regardless of the situation, there may be someone that is more advanced at technology and understanding the hacker mindset and how to infiltrate a system, but the likelihood of that happening is very rare. There's not very many people that are technically gifted to be able to produce that type of attack, and because of that, this is just a concept, and this is not really something that people need to be fearful of at this moment. It's still important to bring up this mindset of why it's important to prevent against these type of attacks. But as I'm saying I'm saying right now, it's not the end of the world when an attack of this scope is initiated, because there's not that many people that know how to do it. Next question: what are the major contributions of this paper? The paper talks about the various methods of attacks that can be executed when the attacker has physical access to the device. Like I said earlier, there's not that many people that have physical access to a device of another individual that have enough knowledge to be able to do the type of attacks that are being spoken of in this article. While it is important, the paper also talks about how IPC channels can be manipulated and what the effects of doing that are. but the overall major contributions that the paper addresses are how password managers, hardware tokens, backends with API can all be manipulated to a IPC related attack. How does this paper advance the state of the art compared with the existing work? That's the next question. Since there's not a lot of information regarding the process of IPC related attacks, I believe the paper leads the way on discussion and talks about the new state-of-the-art attack methods that have been discovered. Since the attack methods are just recently discovered, the paper mainly covers the theory of what could happen if an IPC channel were exploited. The paper talks about hypotheses of how the different types of attacks could be done and how those attacks could affect the unaware user. Like it's being stated, the article mainly talked about the hypothetical. It talked about what could happen if someone knew how to do it, how to do these attacks. It never really went into the evidence and proof that these types of attacks are possible on all operating systems. Their main goal was just to disclose the possibility of how an IPC channel could be exploited, and that is it. Next question. How do the authors evaluate their idea? What are the major results? The author tests their idea by going through several different applications that use IPC related communication and explain how those applications can be compromised. The major results that the author speaks of is how several vulnerabilities in security critical applications, including password managers, two-factor authentication, front-end applications, and back-end processes, can affect the local users if an attack occurred on IPC. While it is possible to use IPC in a secure way, the paper found that many application developers do not give much consideration to the security of IPC related channels. Because of this breakthrough, the author's theory can be proven regarding why having protection against IPC related attacks are so important. Do you think the evaluations, next question. Do you think the evaluations is sufficient? Why or why not? I personally think that the evaluation is not a complete demonstration to prove the argument of the paper as a whole. The evaluations lack a lot of statistical data to calculate if the attack is actually effective. What I'm saying is, with this paper, they mainly talk about the hypothetical, the theory behind an attack. What processes could be manipulated to create an attack. They don't go into the details of whether their test on the attack that they're speaking of could actually be effective. They don't actually go into the details of, we did a test on a Windows computer, a Linux computer, and a Macintosh computer, and we're able to determine that this attack, this way specifically, is actually effective. It's not just a theory, it's an actual proof statement that we are providing to you to let you know that your computer could be compromised if you have a suspicious actor using it. The paper mainly just talks about how an attack could occur, but does not have any evidence of whether the attack would actually be effective. That is why I believe the evaluation provided in the paper is not effective enough way to prove their evaluation. Their evaluation at this point is mainly just theory and hypotheses. It is not. It does not have the statistical backing to prove that the tax vector that they are speaking of could actually cause real compromised systems to be taken. Finally, in your opinion, what are the limitations of this paper? How would you improve it if you were the author? Since the paper is mainly theory-based, research behind IPC-related operations, it is easy to say that the limitations of the paper are mainly hard-tested evidence related to the attack surface. So like I spoke of earlier, the paper does not have very many statistical evidence or hard-tested evidence to prove that what they speak of is actually true. Right now, it is just hearsay and their ideas of what could happen, but there's no actual backing of that. Many of the examples include how the attack could take place, but those lack information regarding the researchers actually testing out their hypotheses to see if they would work as effectively as they claim to. It seems that the main limitations on this paper is the lack of hard thought-provoking evidence proving their theory had been tested and proven correct. If I was to improve any part of this paper, I would have more statistical evidence, such as the results of my attacks on an environment and the evidence collected. This would help prove that the attack vector in which I am talking about is actually physically possible and not just a theory. As well, I think it is important that they should also talk about it's also important that they should talk about not just IPC related attacks for internal users on laptops and such. I think that they should talk more about different applications that could be affected other than just password managers, among other things. I think there's a lot of stuff that is not brought to their attention where they only cover a small fraction of the possibilities of an IPC related attack and its attack scope. So instead of it just covering these, the password manager, two-factor authentication, and the applications that have front-end and back-end processes, I think it's important to also talk about other things that could possibly be affected by IPC related communication. That is why I think that as a whole, this article is still lacking information that is critical to be able to display to vendors of all types that this is lacking information and evidence. Thank you. My citations are here, and my final thoughts. My final thoughts on the paper were it was very well written. It talked about everything that related to IPC to an extent, but I think the one thing that I wish they would have covered more is how to actually do these attacks and whether or not they are as effective as the researchers claim that they could be. I think there's a lot of statistical evidence that is lacking in this paper, and I think that as a reader, it made me want to learn more and see if what they say is actually possible. As it sits right now, I think the paper was a great experiment, a great thought process, a great way of teaching us a little bit about IPC related security issues, but there's still it's still lacking some hard evidence to prove what it's speaking of is actually true. With that, this is Joshua Jenkins. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble about IPC related security, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much. My citations are as follows.